Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're going deep on natural remedies and sourcing healthy food. We've got two videos by Dr. Bobby Price, who's got kind of an interesting background. He's a self-proclaimed holistic doctor, but also a farmer.
Oh, wow. That's a really intriguing combination.
Yeah. And in one of these videos, he's like all about the benefits of burdock root. And then in the other one, he's taking a look at the organic food industry. So having both sides of that coming from the same guy, I think is pretty fascinating. Where do you want to start?
Well, let's maybe kick things off with that burdock root deep dive. I mean, it sounds like Dr. Price is really into it, calling it a powerful blood purifier.
Yeah, he like describes this plant so vividly. You can almost picture yourself like in a forest surrounded by these big heart-shaped leaves. And he points out this really specific detail about them having this like white velvety underside.
Yeah, I remember that. That's actually a really handy tip for anyone who might be trying to identify burdock out in the wild.
Right. It's like a little identifier. He also mentions that if you're going to use it for like medicinal stuff, you got to harvest the root in its first year before it like starts focusing on flowering.
Makes sense. You want to catch it before it puts all its energy into making those flowers.
And speaking of spreading, he tells this funny story about how those burdock burrs, those prickly seed pods, they're like nature's hitchhikers. They just cling to anything that walks by to spread their seeds.
It's like a sneaky way to reproduce, right?
Pretty clever. But let's talk benefits. Dr. Price claims burdock root is packed with antioxidants. Specifically, he talks about quercetin, luteolin, and phenolic acids. He kind of links those to fighting aging. Now, I'm always up for a good science deep dive. What's the actual evidence for these claims?
Well, that's always the million-dollar question with natural remedies, isn't it? I mean, sure, antioxidants are definitely important for overall health, and some studies have shown some promising things. But when you look specifically at burdock root and anti-aging, the research is still pretty limited.
So we don't want to get ahead of ourselves and call burdock root the fountain of youth just yet. Okay, so maybe those antioxidants are good, but we need more research. What about the diuretic effect he talks about? He suggests it can help your kidneys flush out extra fluid, maybe even help with things like edema.
Right, that's another one where we gotta be careful. It's true that people have used burdock root as a diuretic for a long time, but the science to back that up is still kind of iffy. It's possible there's something there, but we need more research to really figure out how it works and what the side effects might be.
So again, moderation is key, and talking to your doctor is never a bad idea, especially if you're thinking of using burdock root to deal with a specific health issue. Okay. He also mentions this cholagogue effect. What is that, and what does it have to do with burdock root?
Okay, so basically a cholagogue is something that makes your gallbladder release more bile, and bile is super important for digestion, especially for breaking down fats. Dr. Price suggests that burdock root's cholagogue effect could help with digestion and maybe even be good for your liver.
Interesting. Are there any studies to back that up?
There have been some studies, like in test tubes, showing that some compounds in burdock root might increase bile production. But again, we need more research, especially studies on real people, to know if it actually works that way and if it's safe.
It seems like a recurring theme with this burdock root. Lots of interesting possibilities, but not a lot of solid evidence yet. He also mentions it potentially helping with skin conditions, arthritis, and even cancer. Have there been any studies looking into those claims?
There have been a few preliminary studies. They hint that some compounds in burdock root might have anti-inflammatory and maybe even anti-cancer properties. But we're really in the early stages here. It definitely doesn't mean burdock root is a proven treatment for any of those things.
Well, grain of salt. Natural doesn't always mean safe and effective.
Right. Even natural stuff can have powerful effects and potential side effects. It's always best to check with your doctor before you start using burdock root for anything specific.
Informed decisions. Sometimes that means accepting that we don't know everything yet. It's amazing how much there is to learn about just one plant, right? Like the burdock root. But let's move on to Dr. Price's other video. This one's all about the organic food industry. It's got to be interesting to hear what he has to say about this,
Yeah.
given his background as a farmer and all this talk about natural remedies. What's his take?
Well, he doesn't hold back. He basically lays out a pretty strong criticism of the whole organic food industry. He even brings up some cases of straight-up fraud, like farmers getting caught selling regular produce as organic.
Really, that's kind of a bummer. Especially for people who are trying to be careful about what they eat. It makes you wonder how good the whole certification process really is. What do you think?
Well, Dr. Price says the current way we do certifications, especially in the U.S., has some pretty big holes. Like, he points out that only a tiny fraction of imported organic stuff actually gets inspected. A tiny fraction? Like, what? That's a little scary. Seems like there's a lot of room for mistakes. Or even people cheating on purpose, if they're hardly checking anything.
Right, and get this, the USDA organic label, you could actually have up to 5% of non-organic stuff in there.
5%. I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it does make you stop and think. If a product can have some non-organic stuff and still be called organic, what does organic even mean anymore? Kind of confusing.
Yeah, that contradiction is at the heart of what Dr. Price is saying. He thinks the USDA's definition of organic is way too narrow. It's all about avoiding those synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. But it doesn't really pay attention to other stuff that matters for sustainable farming, like how healthy the soil is, or promoting biodiversity, or using heirloom seeds.
So it's not just about what's not in the food, it's about the whole philosophy of how it's grown. Exactly. He thinks truly organic farming should care about the whole picture. He even talks about how we're obsessed with perfect-looking fruits and veggies. He says those little blemishes and imperfections, they might actually be a good sign. They could mean the food was grown more naturally, without all the chemicals.
That's an interesting way to look at it. We're so used to seeing those flawless fruits and veggies at the store. Maybe those imperfections actually mean something good. What else does he talk about in this video?
This part was kind of surprising. He mentions that they often use this appeal chemical wrapping on organic produce, to make it last longer on the shelf.
Wait, really? That seems a little ironic. Like you buy something thinking it's healthy and good for the environment, and it might be covered in some chemical.
Right. It makes you question the whole idea of organic being a healthier choice. Does he offer any solutions? Like, how do we deal with all this?
He does. And his advice is pretty practical. He's a big fan of supporting local farmers whenever you can. That way you can actually meet the people who grow your food and see how they do things. He suggests checking out farmers markets, talking to the farmers, even visiting their farms if you can.
I like that, having that connection with the farmer and seeing where your food comes from. That's a kind of transparency you just can't get from a label. Anything else?
He also recommends doing a bit of research on organic standards in different countries. Apparently, organic can mean different things depending on where you are, so it's good to know what you're actually getting.
So even if it says organic on the label, it's worth looking into what that really means in the country where it came from.
Yep. When it comes to food choices, knowledge is power. So it's like, we got to be food detectives, right? Got to look deeper than just the label and do some digging to really know what's going on. What other advice does Dr. Price have for people who are trying to eat healthier and make more ethical choices about their food?
Well, he talks a lot about supporting smaller brands and businesses. He thinks those guys are more likely to stick to real organic practices. They're not as big and maybe not as tempted to cut corners like some of the huge corporations.
Yeah, that goes back to what we were talking about before, like how sometimes these big companies buy out the smaller organic brands and then their standards might slip a bit. So we got to vote with our wallets and support the companies that are doing things the right way. Any other strategies?
He has this one recommendation that I think is really cool. He says we should try to grow at least some of our own food, even if it's just a little herb garden on your windowsill.
I love that. It's so rewarding to grow even a tiny bit of your own food. It makes you feel so connected to where it comes from. And you know exactly what went into it. No mystery ingredients.
That's the point he makes. It gives you control over your food source and lets you get back in touch with nature a little bit. And then the last thing. Even though he talks about all these problems with the organic food industry, he still encourages us to buy organic stuff whenever we can, even if it costs a bit more.
Because in the end, those choices we make at the store, they send a message to the whole system. We're not just buying food, we're supporting a certain way of doing things. We're saying we care about health and sustainability and ethical farming practices.
Yeah. It's like we have power as consumers. Our choices can actually help push the whole food system in a better direction, towards something more conscious and responsible.
This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. We talked about burdock root and all its potential benefits, and also the things we still don't know about it. And then this whole look into the organic food industry with all its twists and turns. It's a lot to think about. What's the one big takeaway you hope our listeners walk away with today?
I want them to feel like they can question things, do their own research, and make choices that match their values, whether it's choosing a local farmer, or finding a smaller brand, or even planting some herbs at home. Every little thing we do makes a difference. It all adds up to a healthier and more sustainable food system for everyone.
That's a great way to put it. So, to all our listeners out there, we're leaving you with this question. What are you going to do to be a more aware and informed food consumer? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep making choices that are good for you and good for the planet.